But the testimony went deeper. Isaiah did not simply offer a retrospective analysis of the battle itself. He pulled back a layer of TDE culture that the public has never been given direct access to, and it recontextualizes everything about Kendrick's approach to competition in a way that should permanently alter how we discuss his artistry. Isaiah described the internal environment at TDE as something that would psychologically dismantle most people who attempted to survive in it, not in a toxic sense, but in the crucible sense. He described a culture where the verbal sparring, the roasting, the constant pressure testing of each other's armor was not optional. It was the oxygen they breathed. You either developed an impenetrable exterior or you crumbled. There was no middle ground, no safe harbor, no participation ribbon hanging from the studio walls. And Kendrick was not just a product of that environment. According to Isaiah, he was the architect of its most intense chambers. Now anchor that understanding against the backdrop of what Drake attempted. Aubrey Graham, a man who built his empire on emotional vulnerability, brand partnerships, and meticulously curated public image, decided to engage in direct combat with someone who was forged in the most ruthless internal creative gauntlet that modern rap has produced. Isaiah's description of TDE's culture is not gossip. It is a blueprint that explains every single move Kendrick made during that exchange. The precision of Not Like Us, the surgical dissection of Family Matters, the controlled escalation from verse to verse, from track to track. None of that was improvised genius. It was the natural output of a man who had been sharpening this exact blade every single day for over a decade, inside a camp where that was the standard, not the exception. And the implications of Isaiah's words stretch further than just the battle itself. Consider the broader landscape of where hip-hop stands in this exact moment. There is a very active effort underway, and anyone with functional observation skills can detect it, to rehabilitate the narrative around Drake's loss and reposition him as the wronged party. Reappearance caught many off guard, offering a perspective that challenges the assumptions the rap world had been holding onto. If you're paying close attention and ready to reconsider how the Kendrick Lamar and Drake situation is remembered, this is a moment worth examining carefully. This is not recycled commentary. It feels closer to an insider perspective emerging from someone who had largely stayed out of the spotlight. Isaiah Rashad, often seen as a quiet and reflective figure within TDE, has largely remained distant from public discourse, especially during major industry moments. His recent appearance on the Apollo podcast offered insights shaped by personal experience and observation. Having been part of the same creative environment, he brings a viewpoint grounded in proximity rather than speculation. Before going further, it's important to understand the context. Isaiah is not an outsider commenting from a distance. He has shared space, creative energy, and professional alignment within the same circle. That background naturally gives weight to his perspective. His decision to speak now, after remaining silent throughout much of the public conversation, suggests a desire to add clarity rather than amplify noise. During the podcast, Isaiah was asked how he viewed the situation between Kendrick and Drake. His response wasn't dramatic or exaggerated. Instead, it reflected a calm and thoughtful assessment. He suggested that those familiar with the internal dynamics of TDE may have had a clearer sense of how things could unfold, not as certainty, but as informed perspective shaped by experience. What stands out most is how his comments encourage a shift away from oversimplified narratives. Rather than framing the situation as purely competitive or confrontational, Isaiah pointed toward a deeper understanding of artistic mindset and creative approach. He highlighted Kendrick's long-standing relationship with lyrical expression, not just as competition, but as a form of creative exploration. Isaiah also reflected on how moments from the past, like Kendrick engaging with projects such as Thought Carter 3, represented a natural expression of artistic curiosity rather than calculated strategy. In that sense, his perspective invites listeners to view these events less as direct conflicts and more as part of a broader creative culture within hip-hop. Ultimately, Isaiah Rashad's input doesn't attempt to declare winners or losers. Instead, it adds nuance, encouraging listeners to think beyond headlines and reconsider how these moments are interpreted within the larger story of the genre. Certain media voices have been constructing a framework that suggests Kendrick bullied his way to dominance, that the culture unfairly turned on Drake, that the aftermath has somehow damaged hip-hop rather than elevated it. Isaiah's testimony demolishes that framework with the subtlety of a wrecking ball through drywall. If the man who was inside the house, who saw the foundation being poured and the walls being raised, is telling you with complete clarity that this outcome was inevitable from inception, then every single argument built on the premise of Drake being ambushed or unfairly targeted collapses under the weight of its own fabrication. There is something else embedded in what Isaiah shared that deserves its own spotlight, and it connects to a much larger truth about creative authenticity in this era of hip-hop. Isaiah referenced control, not casually, not as a passing mention, but as the actual origin point, the detonation sequence that started everything. And what makes this significant is that through the noise of everything that followed, through the years of subliminal exchanges, through the lawsuits and the streaming wars and the social media posturing, the culture has been conditioned to forget the genesis. Control was not an attack on Drake specifically. It was a philosophical declaration about the state of the genre, a challenge issued to every single rapper breathing, and one individual in particular took it as a personal assault on his throne, rather than what it actually was, which was an invitation to elevate. Drake's response to Control, through the Elliott Wilson interview and every subsequent move, was not the response of someone who wanted to raise the bar. It was the response of someone terrified that the bar was being raised without his permission. Jeremy Hatch, who Isaiah specifically referenced and encouraged people to seek out, has constructed an entire documentary series tracing the granular timeline of how this confrontation evolved from its earliest seeds to its ultimate detonation. The fact that Isaiah is directing people toward that body of work tells you something critical about his intent here. He is not interested in surface-level takes or reactionary clips. He wants the full historical context to be understood, because within that context, every single claim that Drake was ambushed or blindsided becomes demonstrably, provably, categorically false. The receipts exist. The timeline is documented. The escalation pattern is mapped out in excruciating detail, and Isaiah is telling you to go look at it yourself, because he knows what you will find when you do. Isaiah identifying this moment, pinpointing Control as the flashpoint with the confidence of someone who watched it catalyze in real time, validates what the most attentive observers of this saga have been articulating for years. The Drake and Kendrick collision was not a sudden explosion. It was a slow-burning fuse lit in 2013 that simply took a decade to reach the powder keg. And Drake, rather than evolving alongside the challenge, spent that entire decade accumulating numbers, consolidating industry power, and building an infrastructure that he believed would insulate him from ever having to answer the bell in a genuine lyrical contest. The infrastructure failed. The numbers did not matter. The industry power evaporated the second the crowd chose artistry over machinery. Isaiah saw it from the inside, and he is confirming what the wreckage already proved. The Apollo conversation also touched on something that many have glossed over, but deserves amplification in this moment. Isaiah was asked directly what his reaction was when the confrontation actually ignited. His answer was not excitement. It was not anticipation. It was self-preservation. He said essentially that his primary concern was that his own name would not get dragged into the crossfire. Think about the magnitude of that for a moment. A TDE artist, someone who is technically on the same roster, was not pumped up for war. He was genuinely concerned about becoming collateral damage, and that tells you something profound about the destructive radius of what Kendrick was preparing to unleash. Even the people on his own team understood that when that weapon fires, it does not discriminate based on affiliation. The blast radius is total. The fallout touches everything and everyone. Isaiah knew that if his name appeared in any bar, from either side, there would be nowhere to hide. That is not the anxiety of someone watching a friendly competition. That is the anxiety of someone understood they were standing in proximity to a generational demolition event. And yet, despite that fear, despite the magnitude of what was unfolding around him, Isaiah also conveyed something that speaks to the deeper essence of TDE's bond. There was never a moment, not a single fraction of a second, where his loyalty wavered. He did not run to neutrality. He did not issue diplomatic statements. He simply went silent and let the architects of this moment handle their business. And notice something else about that silence, something that the culture has not given nearly enough credit to. During the height of that exchange, when names were being dropped like cluster munitions, when reputations were being incinerated in real time across streaming platforms and social media timelines simultaneously, Isaiah Rashad did not leak information. He did not offer cryptic tweets. He did not position himself adjacent to the spectacle for attention. He disappeared entirely. And in a digital era where silence is almost impossible, where the gravitational pull of relevance and engagement metrics corrupts even the most principled individuals, Isaiah's ability to maintain that discipline speaks volumes about the values instilled by the very culture he just described. And in that silence, there was more loyalty than 1,000 public declarations could have communicated.
Isaiah understood his role, understood the hierarchy of the moment, and understood that sometimes the most powerful statement is the absence of one. His silence during the battle was not cowardice, it was strategic discipline learned from the very culture he just described, the same culture that produced the most devastating competitive rapper of this generation. Now extend this understanding to the present moment and what Isaiah's emergence from that silence signifies. He is not speaking now because the danger has passed. He is speaking now because he is creating again, because Samish just dropped, because TDE is in the midst of what can only be described as a generational creative resurgence. Baby Keem is ascending, Kendrick is commanding stadiums, SZA has transcended genre boundaries, and Isaiah Rashad, the man many counted out after his own personal trials became public in the most invasive way imaginable, is standing back in the light, telling you with his art and his words that this family was never fractured, it was loading.
The timing of this testimony also creates an unavoidable contrast with what is happening on the other side of this divide. While Isaiah is breaking his silence to offer genuine insight, authentic perspective, and the kind of first-hand witness testimony that enriches the historical record of one of hip-hop's most consequential moments, the opposing camp is occupied with legal maneuvering, chart manipulation narratives, and a relentless campaign to convince the public that numbers equate to legitimacy. The chasm between those two approaches is the single clearest illustration of everything that separated these two camps from the beginning. One side tells stories, the other side files motions. One side creates art, even in the aftermath. The other side creates litigation. And now Isaiah, by simply sitting down and speaking honestly about what he witnessed and what he knew, has added another chapter to a legacy that is being built through music, through performances, through culture, while the opposing narrative is being constructed exclusively through press releases and court documents. There is a particular segment of the conversation that warrants its own dissection because of how it reframes the entire competitive landscape of hip-hop moving forward. Isaiah described what it takes to survive inside the TDE ecosystem and then extrapolated that outward to essentially argue that anyone who steps to someone forged in that environment without understanding what they are walking into is, to borrow the sentiment he expressed, fundamentally misreading the terrain. This is not arrogance, this is institutional awareness, and it carries weight because Isaiah is not speaking from the perspective of the victor. He is speaking from the perspective of someone who lived inside the same pressure chamber and recognizes the output it produces. When he says that Drake did not understand what he was challenging, he is not making a subjective claim. He is offering an informed assessment based on direct experience with the exact forces that shaped the weapon aimed in Aubrey's direction. Consider for a moment the landscape of people who have offered their analysis on this saga. Media personalities, podcast hosts, former artists, current artists, producers, executives. They have all weighed in with varying degrees of insight and bias, but Isaiah Rashad occupies a category that none of them can claim. He is simultaneously an insider who witnessed the creation of Kendrick's competitive identity, a peer who was tested by the same environment, and an artist who has endured his own public reckoning and emerged with a clarity that only genuine adversity can produce. His perspective is not colored by the desire to generate clicks or align with a popular position. It is rooted in a lived experience that simply cannot be replicated by anyone outside of those walls, and that is what makes this testimony so consequential. The cultural significance of this moment cannot be overstated. In an era where the conversation around hip-hop has been increasingly dominated by external forces, whether that is legal battles, streaming metrics, social media narratives, or corporate interests, Isaiah Rashad just reminded everyone of something fundamental. The music still matters. The relationships still matter. The craft still matter. The culture that produced these artists, the specific chemistry of competition, mentorship, and creative accountability that defined TDE at its peak, that is the infrastructure that created a Kendrick Lamar, not a label budget, not a marketing campaign, not a strategic release calendar, a room full of people who refused to let each other be mediocre. And, according to Isaiah, within that room, Kendrick was the standard against which everyone measured themselves, and he held that position not through intimidation or politics, but through the sheer, undeniable reality that his creative output was operating on a frequency that the rest of them recognized as otherworldly, even when they were standing right next to it. As this conversation reverberates through the culture, as clips circulate and reactions multiply, as the interpretations and counter-interpretations stack up across every platform, the central truth that Isaiah Rashad delivered remains immovable. The Kendrick and Drake confrontation was never a contest between equals. It was, from the very first breath, a mismatch so fundamental that the person closest to understanding both the weapon and the target is sitting here telling you with zero ambiguity that the outcome was written before the first bar was ever recorded. Drake walked into a scenario that was engineered by a lifetime of preparation he never accounted for, against an opponent whose daily routine included the exact kind of creative violence he thought he could survive. And here is the element that should linger in your mind long after this ends. Isaiah Rashad did not need to say any of this. He could have stayed silent forever. He could have continued to let the battle exist in its historical vacuum, allowing the revisionist architects to reshape the narrative at their leisure. But he chose this moment, chose this platform, chose these words because somewhere in his understanding of what TDE represents and what Kendrick accomplished, he recognized that the truth of it was too important to leave unspoken. In a time where so many voices are working overtime to distort the record, Isaiah Rashad just walked into the room and set the entire record straight with the calm authority of someone who does not need you to believe him because he was there. He watched it. He lived it, and now he has told you exactly what it was. The reverberations of this are going to unfold for weeks and months. Every counterargument being constructed on the other side of this divide now has to contend with first-hand witness testimony from inside the camp. Every narrative about Kendrick being a calculated aggressor who weaponized an unfair advantage now has to reckon with the reality that Isaiah just described, which is a creative ecosystem that simply produces a different caliber of artist, one that no amount of external resources can replicate or overcome. And every attempt to rehabilitate the losing side of this ledger now faces the most inconvenient kind of evidence there is, the kind that comes from someone who has nothing to gain, nothing at all to prove, and zero reason to fabricate a single syllable of what he shared. Isaiah Rashad broke his silence, and in doing so, he did not just add a footnote to the greatest rap confrontation of our lifetime. He rewrote the introduction. He provided the context that was always missing. He gave the culture the insider confirmation that transforms speculation into established fact. And from this point forward, anyone attempting to argue that Drake was anything other than fundamentally outmatched from the moment of inception is arguing against the testimony of someone who stood inside the room where it all began. That is not an argument you can win. That is not a narrative you can spin your way out of. That is the truth, delivered by someone who earned the right to tell it at the exact moment the culture needed to hear it most. So sit with that. Let it reconfigure everything you thought you understood about this saga. Let it inform how you evaluate the ongoing attempts to rewrite history in real time, and understand that in hip-hop, as in everything else, the most powerful testimony always comes from the people who were there, who saw it with their own eyes, and who waited until the right moment to tell you exactly what they witnessed. Isaiah Rashad was there. He just told you, and nothing about this conversation will ever look the same again. The walls are closing in from every direction now. The legal arguments are failing. The streaming manipulation narratives are being exposed in real time. The media allies who spent months constructing rehabilitation frameworks are watching those frameworks collapse under the pressure of first-hand accounts they cannot discredit or dismiss. And Isaiah Rashad, the quietest soldier from the camp that produced the greatest competitive rapper alive, just walked to the center of the room and laid down testimony that no court filing, no chart statistic, no PR campaign, and no revisionist energy can overturn. This is the record now. This is the truth. And the culture is better for having finally heard it from someone who earned every syllable of the right to speak it.